pleasure to welcome you here today for, again, good afternoon, everyone. I know we've just gone live. It is certainly my sincere pleasure to welcome you all here today for the discussion on the data governance, data-driven governance. It's a subject that has taken a whole new dimension given the COVID-19 environment. I think it's been a subject in vogue for many years, but obviously with the advent of the COVID-19 environment that we became almost overnight, more of a contact-free economy, and there's a lot of online activities and hence the exponential increase in the number of data. And obviously, whether you're a business, government, smart cities, data is becoming the catalyst for much of the innovation and the way to derive better economic rent and outcomes for both the economy, but also for citizens, and creating a more shared digital future for much of the economy and the society as well. So today's discussion, how will it roll out? My intent is to present the panelists just by name and title. After that, I will be asking each of them to provide a 3-minute synopsis, maybe 5 minutes, depending if Teppo can join us at the same time. So we'll start with 5-minute synopsis on the issue to provide us a baseline for discussion that we can basically shape the questions around those. And after that, we'll start with the Q&A, and we'll be delighted to have a wonderful debate and discussion on this subject. So with that in mind, let me start by introducing the panelists. So the first panelist is Christine Keogh. She's the Chief Data Officer at the Mayor's Office on Technology and Innovation in the city of San Jose in the US. Welcome. It must be morning for you, Christine, at the moment. And the second panelist is Miquel Estapé. He joins us from Catalonia in Europe, northern Spain. He's a VP of Government Digital Innovation at ACGP. And the third panelist, who we're hoping that will join us as well, is Teppo Rantanen. He's Executive Director, Growth, Innovation, and Competitiveness at the City of Tampere. He's also responsible for Smart Tampere and other major city development programs. So with that in mind, maybe Christine, I can start off with you in terms of how do you manage the data-driven governance? How do you look at the dimension, not only from an economy, but the equity and the shared digital future for the city of San Jose? So with that, pass it over to you, Christine.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And at least, I'm really excited to kind of share what we've been able to build in the city of San Jose over the past year. And just for some context, I mean, beyond serving in the public sector during the pandemic, at least in the United States and certainly in the city of San Jose, we had, I think the city was kind of in a, the city really was in a position to really engage the community on issues around equity, on issues around police reform. And so during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests of summer 2020, the mayor actually formed the first ever office on racial equity. And I think actually forming this intentional office to focus on racial equity, in one of the largest cities in the US, also actually helped inform the mandate of my team and our innovation office. And so over the past year, what we've been doing is really using data to drive equitable outcomes. We have established a consistent framework that was co-developed by myself and an former classmate of mine at Harvard, where we were really interested in actually using a facilitation workshop to help each department align on a set of equity objectives and a set of metrics that could help us measure the historical performance of that objective. And the way we have been able to do that is because we are not actually using survey data. We actually are using administrative data, or for those of you in the private sector, it's the equivalent of production data, right? Instead of looking at a survey about a city program, which is what most governments do to inform their understanding, we're actually looking at 10 to 20 years worth of registration data to understand who we've actually been serving and using that to inform our equity objectives and our equity understanding. understanding. And so those are kind of two ways we've differentiated. And the last thing that we're really passionate about is really tying equity to performance. I think what's really powerful about working in the public sector is, our job really is to serve everyone, right? Like there really isn't, at least for us, like equity is actually a mandate by our constituents. And so, the city has had kind of a history of working with data in a way that's very historical, right? Like I think they like to work with census data. I think sometimes that data doesn't always lead to performance metrics. And so one of the things that we are really passionate about is actually using it to think through speed of delivery, understanding throughput, understanding retention of programs, understanding churn, even taking our data set and looking at the distribution of the resources by zip code and even by like various sites like community centers. So that's kind of where we're at for San Jose, and happy to kind of have the rest of the hour to talk more about what we're working on.
Excellent. Thank you, Christine. I'll hand it over to Mikhail to provide some synopsis, and then we can start with the questions. Over to you, Mikhail.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this great event. And I'm delighted to be here with you, and I hope that you are all fine. Yeah, I work in government. I am based in the city of Barcelona, in Catalonia, region of Spain. I am a civil servant. I am passionate about driving the digital government transformation and fostering public innovation. And first of all, I would like to say that the views and opinions that I will share are my own, and I'm not talking on behalf of any government or organization. Currently, I am the Chief Innovation Officer of the Digital Transformation Public Agency, with the mission to foster the digital transformation of Catalonia's public sector, which includes about 1,000 local governments. Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, that's actually too much. This is not sustainable. Most of them are small or very small, and that is a great limitation. But we have managed to turn this weakness into our strength. So now we managed to develop a very successful shared services platform. And at the same time, what we got is a shared government data platform, which holds most of the digital transactions in Catalonia. So that's our power. We have most of the data, of the e-services data in our platform, and we can develop advanced services using that data. And to achieve this, our digital agency has a very collaborative governance approach, a citizen-centric, and also a turnkey approach to provide technology, support, training, legal advice, data privacy, and best practices. Because at the end, digital transformation is about people, it's about processes, it's about culture. Technology is the less important of all the factors. So just very few general considerations about talking about data governance. The top 5 more valuable companies of the world right now are technological companies that take advantage of data. And the question is, are governments harnessing the power of data as well? And from my experience, my humble experience, the answer is not. We are not, we are far behind. A second consideration is that has government all the data with public value? And again, the answer is no, from my point of view. There is very important key public value data about, for instance, mobility from Google Maps or Waze, or data about tourism, for instance, from Airbnb, or about health from fitness trackers like the one I'm having in my Greece right now. All this data is not accessible for the governments, by the governments. And they are very important in terms of planning and taking good decisions, best decisions about policies. So this data has to be available for the common good. And this is a challenge that we haven't solved yet. And we have somehow to work together with the private sector to have access to all this data. And finally, what do we need to take advantage of the data from the perspective of the government? So we need basically technology, skills, and culture. And the thing is, technology is a commodity and it's cheap, so that is not an issue at all. People, that is a big issue. We don't have the skills about data analytics in governments in general. And finally, it's about data governance. It's about creating a data-driven culture. And that is very, very tough because at the very end, data is power, and the governments, we don't compete each other, but we are not keen on sharing our power.
Excellent. Thank you, Miguel. So let's start with the questions. Both fascinating introduction. Christine, you raised so many questions in my mind, frankly, that I wanted to discuss about the equity, the data equity framework that you mentioned. I'd love to know, well, I think it's a lovely and a novel idea of how to create something like that, but how do you measure it? What's the equity metrics that you use? How do you measure it? How do you enforce it? How do you provide access to it? So I would love to hear more about that, if you can expand on this arena.
Yeah, I'd love to. So it's easier to just talk about it with a very specific example. And so I can, provide a short case study to kind of help folks kind of understand, like, to kind of ground us in examples. So one of our first data projects was actually looking at the distribution of youth scholarships in our city. And I think these are one of those things where it doesn't matter what city you're in, whether you're in San Jose, California, or you're San Jose, Puerto Rico, right? Like, one of the things that city governments do is provide public space. We provide subsidized childcare. We provide places for people to go. And so I partner with the Parks and Recreation Department, and the scholarship that I was studying was actually one that was really important, because this was actually what made a lot of these recreation programs affordable for lower income families, right? So, these are your after school programs. These are, for working class families. This is the city provided program for where kids can go after school. So it was really important. And there is an equity lens to it, right? Because it informs access, it requires access to, childcare. And so we didn't have, San Jose historically, we didn't actually collect race data. But the thing is that we did have a good understanding of socioeconomic distribution. We did know kind of like what were the zip codes that we should actually pay attention to, and whether or not we were serving those zip codes correctly. And so what we ended up doing was we actually took 10 years worth of, quite frankly, objective data on who we actually were able to help, and started looking at over the last 10 years, right, at every single stage, we did reform the program many times, quite frankly, over 10 years. It's been run very differently. But we were really interested in actually understanding, when the city was increasing spending on this program, did it impact distribution? Did it impact the number of unique individuals? And, and a lot of this is, we're starting to go public with it. And, but, one of the things that we were actually noticing, and it kind of leads to equity, is the fact that, we are spending more money on it, right? And that's just because, quite frankly, the cost of living in Silicon Valley has continuously gone up. So the need has extended, right? But the number of unique individuals that we're serving has actually gone down over time, mostly because programs are still getting more expensive. And I thought the one thing that we discovered that was most interesting was the fact that the number of new individuals that we were serving has also gone down, which meant that over the last 10 years, the families who figured it out and could prioritize it for their children, I think we're serving them better. And that's wonderful. But we have been serving less and less new people. And that's partially because we don't have a marketing budget. Parks and Recreation doesn't have a marketing budget. I think my colleagues on the call can agree that city governments, like, we're not as good of marketers, right? And that is actually something we need to think about when it comes to equity. And so this is just kind of an example where, we were actually able to kind of have a conversation around equity, have a conversation around performance, even though we didn't have some of the data around race, we didn't have data around socioeconomic status, simply because we could think at least critically about, going forward, is this something we should pay attention to, right? Should we actually find more, should we try to prioritize people who have never benefited from this service before? Should we allocate new dollars to folks who are signing up for the first time? How do we enforce this? And this is kind of, this is actually not my expertise, right? But this is where folks who are program administrators, you give them that insight, their eyes light up, and then the program can be improved. And at least from my team, we can keep measuring it. So this is just kind of a really simple example of how we were able to use data to even talk about it in terms of equity of distribution.
That's excellent, Christine. Actually, it's fascinating to hear you, because you're coming at it not from a data issue, you're coming at it from how do I serve my constituents better? And you're looking at all the indices and parameters on that. So it's good for you to think of, what's the end results and how to drive better outcomes for the citizens. Teppo, thank you for joining us. We've gone through the introductions, and because of the time, I will go to Mikhail for the question and then come back to you for first question on the smart cities and the data driven as part of this, the data governance and smart cities. But Mikhail, in terms of, you talked about the government and how to drive better improve public service as a result of that. Can you provide some examples and sort of business models of how you achieve that in Catalonia?
Yeah. Let me share what is our strategy. First of all, what we think we have to define, it's a clear human-centric strategy, because at the very end, data is a means, it's not an end. And there are many governments that have lots of data, but they are not using this data to improve services. And the main reason is because they don't have a citizen-centric or human-centric strategy behind all this data. And from my experience, most of public services are government-centric. So they are designed to solve the internal authorities' issues. And citizens rarely participate in the design of the services. So citizen-centric is about understanding citizens' needs and expectations and anticipating the services that they will require. And to get that, to achieve that, so we have to do several things. One is to define the key performance indicators that make sure that we evaluate our progress and we provide value for the users. Some of them, or the main key performance indicators that we use is about the digital maturity or the digital usage by citizens. And the second one is related to measuring citizen satisfaction. So the way to understand citizen needs, there are different approaches. We use two approaches to get that. One of them is about asking to citizens about what are their needs. And the other one is analyzing what citizens do without asking anything. So for the first approach, asking to citizens, so we get a lot of data from citizens because we conduct satisfaction surveys every time they go to a government website. We get about 500,000 surveys every year with about 200,000 comments about the quality of the government services. To analyze that, I don't have a big team. Actually, it's a very small team. We use some natural process language tools to get the insights from all this data. We also have another platform which is a feedback platform, so where the citizens can submit their ideas to improve the government services. And we also analyze all of this data from citizens, and we prioritize which are the best to submit to the development team. So that's one approach. And the other approach is about not asking to the citizens, just analyzing what they do. And that is very powerful, actually. So what we do basically is analyze all the funnels of transactions. Basically, we analyze all the website analytics. And one of the key measures is about the completion rate. It's about the number of digital transactions that the users complete as the percentage of all transactions. Yeah, and the thing is that we find that about 50% of the users do not finish their transaction online. So to understand why they don't finish that, it's very, very powerful. Where they get stuck, where they get confused, where they need extra support. And for instance, we have a chatbot support, and we have a telephone support, and so on. And we are making big improvements in those areas.
Perfect. Thank you, Mikhail. Teppo, so maybe just for the audience, Teppo Rantanen is Executive Director, Growth, Innovation, and Competitiveness at the City of Tampere in Finland, and he's also responsible for smart cities. And obviously, smart cities have been a subject of much discussion in the last number of years because, according to many data, there's 55% of the world population now lives in cities, generating approximately 75% of the world GDP. It's been the push for driving a lot of the economy, attracting investment, and where the growth of jobs is going to be done. And data plays at the heart of this issue. So would love to hear from you, Teppo, in terms of how did you went about developing that and harnessing the best out of the data to drive better outcomes, economics, jobs, and for citizens in general.
Yes, Namir, thanks. We've been running our Smart City program for 5 years now, and the next phase what we're moving into is what we call now the data-driven city for citizens. And in the course of the years, we've been able to find ways of capturing a lot of data. So we have a lot of sensors in place, a lot of information in place which comes to us. And now we're thinking about how we can best use that data to improve the everyday life of our citizens. So that's become the key topic. And there's a lot of different types of data we're getting. We're looking at from, because healthcare is part of what we're doing in the city. We're doing it from the health data perspective. We're looking at it from the infrastructure data perspective, from traffic, from people moving around, and a lot of things which we believe that combining the data in a good way would be beneficial for our citizens. And we're looking for different ways and means how to use that. But Miguel was saying about, how can we make sure that we get the privacy, we get the security of the people, how can we comply with GDPR and other requirements? And we're looking at it from the angle that, hey, we have a society where we have quite a lot of trust in people to the government, and that can be used also to get permission, the access to the data of our citizens, and find ways how we can actually bring them better governance, how we can bring them better life, better everyday life with the intelligent use of data, using AI and analytic tools for that. And what we're looking for now is actually how can we build some real case business models around this, and how can we see the power of the public sector and private sector working together on this. So that is our key task right now. I'm very, very excited about this.
Great, thank you, Teppo. So there are so many questions. I think we can go for an hour, but let me just ask Christine, just quickly in doing the equity framework and dealing with a lot of underserved populations and trying to respond to that environment. How were you able to provide access to that data and information? Are they well connected? Are they already online? I know the city of San Jose is something, but love to hear from you. I know it's a tough question to answer, but it has to be asked.
We're the capital of Silicon Valley, and with some of the best data brokers, data providers, data software vendors, like in literally our backyard. But I would say the city's data processes are not that sophisticated. And so the reality is, especially the data I'm working with, this isn't open data. This is it's data that's locked into in every department's product, like their version of a registration database, right? And right now our team has completed data projects from Parks and Recreation. We've done it for the police, we've done it for public housing. And the funny thing is, it feels a little bit like treasure hunting, but without the tools. But the data is the treasure. So, that's actually like when I'm hiring new data scientists, I kind of explain, I was like, once upon a time when you were in the private sector, right? Here, you had an integrated, unified data system. We're not there yet with the city, right? And so really, it's just, and I honestly think even for more sophisticated, and a lot of it has to do with privacy. I saw that Mohammed in our audience is starting to ask about that. It is important, right? As in, I don't know if in the public sector, we want to be that frictionless when it comes to access, because when you join different kinds of data sets, it will help you see a lot of things that are important for the city, but it can also, we also want to be really conscious of the sensitivities in our community, right? I'll be very frank, San Jose, one of the most diverse communities in the US. And I also serve a large undocumented community. It's something I think about. And so, practically, what does my team do day to day? We go into each department. It's a different situation every single time. We actually manually extract the data, and we do the pre-processing in Python. So that's the data cleanup and then the analysis. But it's kind of a different adventure each time because it depends on the system.
Sounds good. Excellent, Christine. Maybe last question. We've got 4 minutes left, at least as I see on the screen. But Mikael, you mentioned, or Teppo, either of you, do you think in this data-driven governance, we talked about the technology, we talked about the data itself, how to access it, store it, the privacy and all of this, but what about the talent associated with that? Do you think there is some occupational skills or even foundational skills that we need to develop as citizens, as nations, as something to get to harness that information much better in the future? Anybody would like to jump on that question?
So if I take the first sort of a shot on that, just to say that I think, first of all, it's a question of attitude. It's a question of mindset. That comes before the skills and before the other things. So if people are open and willing to jump in there, then it's easier to develop the skills. Then it goes to deeper skills. Yeah, we need them desperately. It's a shortage of skills in that space. I'm sure it's the same thing with you, Christine and Mikael.
But do you think there's beyond that occupational, there are foundational skills for the average person to access, to use that something? So I'd love to hear from that.
Yeah. For instance, we have an open data platform with all the information for all local governments in Catalonia about all the main areas, like, for instance, budget, for instance, contracts, for instance, subsidies. So that's open for anybody to analyze. But they actually very few people reuse it. And we are using an open source, open data platform, so they can analyze the data from different ways, like going to the website with some predefined reports. They can download it in an Excel file, or then they even can integrate with an API, with APIs. But even then, the reusage is very low. And the main reason is about the mindset, about the culture, at least in Spain, in Catalonia, about accountability. There is not a strong demand of accountability from society. And that's a big issue. And that's a big issue, because at the end, we have good politicians if we have a society that asks for accountability about the policies.
So, okay, so we got two. Sorry, go ahead, Christine.
All right. I mean, the last thing I want to add here is, when I first came into, I joined the city from the private sector, and I think I thought, like, okay, my first job is to find folks who can code in Python, and go find some data scientists and recruit them to my team. But honestly, now that I'm kind of going into my, I'm wrapping up my first year in this office, I'm actually realizing that basic statistics, you can't just assume that everyone has a good grasp on basic statistics, and it's not their fault, right? At least in the United States. I'm just going to talk about the California public education system. Statistics is not compulsory, right? And that does actually matter when you are a government agency publishing data, right? Because you can, it's like, you could say you're being transparent when you publish 10,000 data sets, but if no one has the capacity to understand what you're publishing, is that really transparency? Is that really accountability, right? And so I think a lot about that, actually, not just when I'm presenting my work to internal staff like the mayor, but also when I'm thinking about how do I take this data and actually connect it to the community.
Sorry.
Excellent. Sorry, we've reached the end of the thing. It's a short 30 minutes. I think that we're just scratching the surface. There's a lot to be discussed on this topic. Listen, thank you very much for all of you for the insights and ideas that you bring to the table. Look forward to continued discussion on this subject in the future, and wish you all the best. Thanks to the audience to join us as well, and we look forward to future sessions. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.